Welcome back to Stab the Dragon Productions and American Catechism, episode number 46 for State's Birthday Series number 7. Coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas on Friday, January 2nd, 2026. It is currently 76 degrees and sunny, while it is 15 degrees and cloudy in Juneau, Alaska. American Catechism is all about exploring and promoting Americanology, celebrating our history, politics, theology, culture, Western civilization as well, along with some adult beverages along the way. Today, we're going to do Alaskan beer. Amber. Alaskan amber. Why? Because tomorrow is Alaska's Statehood Day. Today is actually Georgia's statehood birthday, and I put out a video yesterday on that. Today is also National Science Fiction Day, the birthday of Isaac Asimov. I don't have anything to say about that yet, but maybe next year. But tomorrow is Alaska's Day, so I'm doing this video today. And because Alaska has no whiskey that I can obtain, we're doing their beer. So, let's talk about Alaska first before we look at this beer. Alaska is our 49th state, coming into the Union on January 3rd, 1959. It is, of course, the largest state by land area and is larger than Texas, Montana, and California all put together. However, it is only 48th in population. Its largest city is Anchorage, and its capital is Juneau, which is where Alaskan beer is made. And that's why I gave Juneau's temperature. The highest elevation is Mount McKinley or Mount Denali. Either one. I prefer McKinley. And it is 20,310 feet. And I've seen it with my own eyes, although I didn't see the top of it. The cloud cover was obscuring the top. And it's got the unique distinction of being the state has the unique distinction of being our furthest north, furthest west, and furthest eastern state. How does that even work? The landmass of Alaska is part of North America, and it borders on British Columbia, the Yukon, the Arctic Ocean, Bering Sea, the Pacific Ocean, Russia, and it is those Aleutian Islands that are stretching out into the Pacific that cross the international date line and enter the Eastern Hemisphere. However, those islands keep Alaska time and date, and so even though technically it's tomorrow there, they, just for convenience sake, to keep Alaska sane, they keep Alaska date and time. So that's that's why it's the furthest east. It's actually some of the islands are in the Eastern Hemisphere. Go figure. When the Spanish discovered the Americas, they found people already here, the Native Americans, the Indians. And eventually the priests and scholars of the Spaniards in the 16th century began wondering who these people were and where did they come from, because they did not match up with anything they read in their Bibles. Some began to theorize that far to the north there must be a link with Asia, because the Spaniards who had seen Asians, recognized some similarities between the Indians and the Asiatics in many ways. So they kind of put two and two together and said, well, maybe they came from there. And it must be further north. Now, as the study of geology, fossils, and glaciers progressed, by the late 19th century to early 20th century, scientists were beginning to put together the puzzle pieces and understand the Ice Age, and that the sea levels dropped by over 300 feet due to the amount of water locked up in the glaciers. And that as the sea levels had dropped, a land bridge connecting northeast Siberia with western Alaska and that this could be where the first peoples crossed over from Asia to North America. This theory of a land bridge held sway in the scientific community until just recently. And what the theory was is that there was some kind of a magical pathway through the glaciers that people could come across Beringia, the landmass connecting the two continents. And it was glacier free at some point, and they could come down through this gap in the glaciers and then people all of America from north to south. Well, there were some problems with that. One of the biggest problems is that the South American Indians and Central American Indians seem to have way more advanced civilization than anything found in North America. And so that was a problem. But then the whole theory of, an exodus across Canada, there's not much evidence for that. I mean, yeah, there's some ancient man and campsites that they have found, but nowhere near enough to support the theory. So the theory began getting some holes poked in it. And so now, in the last 25 years or so, the next theory is that people used boats to travel from Asia around Beringia down through Alaska, Canada, Washington State, Oregon, California, on the seacoast. That boats provided a much more rapid means of transportation, and that the seacoast provided plenty of food for the people. So the problem, though, is there's not much evidence of that, because as the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, all these shoreline campsites would be underwater now. And but nonetheless, scientists are finding dates of campsites and human evidence stretching into 20, 30,000 years ago, all throughout America now. And so they've got, and also when the glaciers were in effect and the sea levels had dropped, there's a chain of islands that stretch from Indonesia, Australia, all the way across, right? And so you could island hop from Indonesia, Malaysia, to Australia, to New Zealand, and all the way across the South Pacific to South America. So those are some theories that are currently being discussed. But nonetheless, Alaska still would have been a strong entry point coming around the coast. So ancient man came here largely from, though maybe not exclusively from, through Alaska. Alaska was first discovered and colonized by the Russians, maybe as early as the 17th century, but credit is usually given to Vitus Bering, who was sailing for the Russian Navy, and whose name is given to the Bering Strait. Now, Bering was sailing for the Russian Navy, and so that's why the Bering Strait is named after him. And about 1741 is when he discovered Alaska, and the first colony by the Russians was established in 1784. So our state, Alaska, was colonized by the Russians. The Spanish also lay claim to Alaska, though. In 1789, they landed at Nootka Sound and established several other forts, including the fort at the port of Valdez, named with a Spanish name. That's on Prince William Sound now. So the Spanish and the Russians both laid claim to Alaska. In 1867, though, the United States Secretary of State, William Seward, negotiated the sale of Alaska from Russia with Tsar Alexander II for $7.2 million. On October 18th of 1867, at Sitka Island, the Russian flag was lowered and the American flag raised in front of the soldiers of both sides, as well as the governmental delegations, so that October 18th is now commemorated as Alaska Day. And at the time, and for a long while afterwards, this was known as Seward's Folly. Yeah, well, who's laughing now? It ain't the Russians. In 1897, gold was discovered in the Yukon, and the Alaskan gold rush was on by 1898. And this brought a huge influx of people to Alaska and was written about by the American author Jack London, who participated in that event and wrote a few books about the subject. In June of 1942, a little known bit of World War II history here, the Japanese invaded the islands of Attu and Kiska in the Aleutians, thus occupying American territory. It wasn't a state yet, but it was American-held territory. In May of 1943, the Americans landed and fought a horrific battle on Attu to retake it from the Japanese, while the Japanese had already evacuated Kiska. But during the war, the American Army had built the highway, the Alaskan Highway, through the woods and the mountains to connect Alaska to the lower 48. For a couple of decades there had been planning and negotiations with Canada for constructing this highway that would connect Alaska to the States. But after the December 7th bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, and war with Japan happened, well, let's just say the negotiations rapidly got smoother, easier, and quicker. The invasion of Kiska and Attu spurred the highway on, and it was completed in 1942 by the Army and the Corps of Engineers, and utilizing thousands of black soldiers as laborers. And when we were in Anchorage, we went to a museum, and there was a whole big display about the construction of that road. And that was really, a little movie and everything. And it was really fascinating to watch that. So, what's my personal connection to Alaska? Well, as a kid, I learned that both Alaska and Hawaii became states after I was born. And so I always thought that was kind of cool. But my son, one of my sons is in the Army, and he was stationed in Alaska for a few years. And we had one grandson born in Alaska, and we went up there for a visit, of course. So we did have a family connection with the last frontier. So we traveled to Anchorage. In fact, we flew in on summer solstice, the longest day of the year. And when we got there at like 1:30 in the morning, I think, it was still kind of daylight. That was weird. We traveled to Anchorage, of course. We flew into Anchorage and, toured the sites, some museums and stuff, and animal things, and went inland and went to Mount Denali, and so we had a good time. Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson was there, so got to see. We were driving around the airfield and got to see a flight of F-22s take off in a hurry to go intercept Russian bombers. All right, on to Alaskan Amber Ale here. I don't know anything about beer. I drink beer once in a while, but I'm primarily a whiskey guy. So this is known as, this is from Alaskan Brewing Company in Juneau, Alaska. This is an alt-style beer, alt-style ale, 5.3% ABV. Paid $10.52 for a 6-pack of 12-ounce cans at Specs here in Fort Worth. Now, the word alt, A-L-T, alt, is German for old and refers to apparently the fermentation process for this style of beer that takes longer because it's fermented at a colder temperature. This uses both European and Pacific Northwest hops varieties and premium two-row pale barley and special malts. They use glacier water from Alaska, as one would think. It says that the bitterness is 18 IBU and the color is 22 SRM. I have no idea what that stuff means because, like I said, I know nothing about beer. I enjoy the taste once in a while. This is cool and refreshing, and again, it's like 76 degrees in Fort Worth today. It's Not really bitter. I mean, it's very mild, mildly sweet, mildly bitter. Not much maltiness going on here. This is a mild beer for a mild person. Low on flavor, but nothing negative either. This is the type of beer a beer drinker could sit with and pound down a six-pack. Ugh, never. I had this about 10 years ago or so, and generally speaking, it was pleasant. But now it's just a bit too mild. If I was out somewhere and somebody offered this to me, I would take it if there was no other options. And it's probably better than most other national brands, but will this be a regular? No, no, no. Uh, no. Appearance, you can see the color. This is part of why it's called an amber beer, is it's kind of a reddish amber color. It is clear, nice and clear. And if you saw me pour it at the start, it had a nice foamy head. That little bit foams up quite nicely. The smell, nothing. Nothing. Very mild. Nothing offensive. Nothing attractive. Maybe just a hint malty. The taste is not very hoppy, not real malty, just kind of mild. It's not thin, it's not flat. Now, apparently, there's a rating scheme out there, 1 through 5, with various fractions thrown in. And I would give this a 3 out of 5 because it's so mild. It's inoffensive. It's drinkable, but it's not exciting. All right, well, that does it for Alaska and for Alaskan Amber. Next on American Catechism, my favorite author, J.R.R. Tolkien, has a birthday tomorrow. So we might do a show on Tolkien and just talk about Tolkien a little bit. For now, this is American Catechism out here.